right, Keith Idec is back. Boxing news, uncrowned on Yahoo Sports, fresh off his trip to Texas, where he was ringside for the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul extravaganza. Keith, did you enjoy your experience in Arlington?
Well, nothing better than 5 days in Dallas. Virtually no access to the fighters you're there to cover. Um, so no, I did not. I got a lot of Marriott points and United Airlines points. If anything, that's about the best positive I could take away from the trip. Although the atmosphere was good, Chris, I would say 70 plus thousand people for a boxing event. And of course, we got the Amanda Serrano, Katie Taylor rematch and some solid fights on the undercard. So there were positive things to take away from it. But as I get older and crankier, the less time I spend on the road in hotel rooms by myself, the better off my mood will be.
Now, did you get access to the $2 million seats, the ringside seats they sold,
I did.
the Barca loungers and food and whatever it is you got for $2 million?
We did get food vouchers as they do now with the media, as opposed to having a media uh, food room or however they used to do it in the old days or whatever. We did get food vouchers, but not that matters. I mean, we pay for our own food, or our employers should pay for our own food, I guess I should say. But um, uh, we had no access to those types of cushy chairs, and we were probably about 100 yards from the ring, 90 yards from the ring or so, which is you just stay home really. If you're not going to get access to the fighters and you're going to be so far away from the ring and Netflix is going to buffer for most of the night, I don't know. We all could have made more constructive use of our time, I suppose.
That is one of the challenges of covering boxing at AT&T Stadium. I think the last time I was there in that media section was a Pacquiao fight years ago. And you're really not watching anything going on in the ring. You're watching everything going on the big screen, or you're watching it on one of the monitors in front of you, even on your laptop. It's challenging to be there. It's almost makes it, to a point, nonsensical to be there.
Chris, the funniest thing is it's called AT&T Stadium. The internet connection in that venue is worse than any other venue with consistency that I've ever covered fights. It's probably the sixth or seventh boxing event that I've covered there, and the internet connection for the media, or for anyone, I would suppose, is never consistent. It never stays on. And again, it's called AT&T Stadium. So it's like going to T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas and covering fights and not being able to connect. There's just a multitude of issues that make it very frustrating. And it seems like, yeah, your job is to write about boxing, stop complaining. I understand that, and that's correct to a degree. At the same time, if you don't have the things in place that make it worthwhile to cover an event on site, you kind of feel like, well, what am I doing here? What purpose am I serving here? So that's kind of the way I felt last week. In some ways, I felt like I was able to write some compelling pieces and give my opinion of the event, which is my job to some degree, mostly. But I just didn't feel like it was a constructive use of my time. And moving forward, I don't know that I would go to cover Jake Paul fight weeks unless I'm told that you absolutely must, because you're not getting access to anything. So not even undercard fighters for the most part. So that's a media problem. The people, they don't really care how the soup is made or whatever. But I'm just, since you were asking, I'm full of complaints, as you can see.
Sorry I asked. I want to talk about the Netflix experience a little bit and the fallout from that, but I want to kind of put a button on the fight itself, because in the immediate aftermath of this fight, Keith, over the last few days, I have seen conspiracy theories run wild about what played out in this fight. Mike Tyson pulling his punches. I saw Michael Irvin, the former Dallas Cowboys wide receiver, making the rounds early in the week, talking about how there was some contractual language that Mike Tyson couldn't throw an uppercut in that fight. Here's the reality of Mike Tyson-Jake Paul. Mike Tyson is 58 years old. It has been a long time since he was relevant in the ring. And even though Jake Paul is not a great boxer, maybe not even a good boxer, he's good enough that a 27-year-old Jake Paul is always going to beat a 58-year-old version of Mike Tyson. I've got people in my Twitter feed, Jake, saying, well, what about those Instagram videos? What about all the viciousness that Mike was showing in those 20-second clips that were all over social media over the last few months? That's all they were. They were 20-second clips. Mike Tyson is a 58-year-old grandfather. He is not capable physically of going out there and hunting down a boxer in the same way he used to. He wasn't able to do that at the back end of his actual fighting days, which came 19 years ago. What made anyone believe that he was going to be able to go out there and do it now? So this is just my way of saying, listen, conspiracy theorist, people on my social media timeline sending me clips of like, oh, look, Tyson pulled his punch here and he didn't throw an uppercut there. That's not what played out. He is a 58-year-old man. This is why 58-year-old men should not be in the boxing ring, because they can't do things physically that maybe they used to do. So your final thoughts, I guess, on the fight itself.
Well, my first thought is that you called me Jake, which must mean you think that all 50-something-year-old bald white guys are one and the same.
That's my bad.
Kudos to my boy Jake Donovan. Kidding.
A lot of Jakes going around here. We're having a Jake conversation.
Jake Paul, Jake Donovan. I got you. Chris, there's so much to unpack there, really. I mean, look, I would be careful with not directing this at you, obviously, because I know you're not espousing these conspiracy theories. You just have to be careful in that sense. If you have any real journalistic responsibility, which Michael Irvin clearly does not, I'm not sure Joe Rogan does either, because while his podcast is wildly popular, he says a lot of nutty things on there. He went over some sort of script that he insists exists. And if it does, boy, I'd sure like to see it. And if it doesn't, shouldn't Joe Rogan be sued? Because he's saying that the fight was he's not intimating that it was fixed. He's saying quite literally that it was fixed with a round by round script that he's reading off of. If that is true, great work by Joe Rogan getting the proof of that. If it isn't, it's wildly irresponsible for him to say that because of all the heat on this fight. Now, would I be surprised if they had a silent agreement and move forward just like a lot of people are accusing them of doing on Friday night? No, I wouldn't, because it played out in some ways like a lot of people expected it to play out. I specifically asked Nikisa Badarian a couple of weeks before the fight during a phone interview that we had. I said, look, a lot of people think this is a work. This is a WWE-like work, and they have a silent agreement because Mike is 58 years old. They're friends. They're business partners, it would seem. They seem to really like each other. Of course, he's not going to, if there's a silent agreement, he's not going to say that there is. But he gave me a very thoughtful, very reasonable answer as to why there wouldn't be. First and foremost, that they're in business with Netflix, and Netflix is the biggest streaming service in the world and is not going to defraud the public knowingly anyway, you wouldn't think. And then the Texas Commission would, I don't know if they'd have to be in cahoots with them to do it, but they are sanctioning the event. And then you're risking being suspended by the ABC, which would have to acknowledge any suspension within any U.S. jurisdiction. There are a lot of complications there that would make that very complicated and very tricky to pull off, despite all the speculation. What I would say is, I don't know if Mike Tyson couldn't or wouldn't do anything that people thought that he was capable of, however misguided they might have been, because he's 58 years old. I don't know if he couldn't do it or he wouldn't do it or a combination thereof, but he didn't do it. Same goes for Jake Paul, who admitted afterward, Chris, in the post-fight press conference, he said he was asked directly, did you carry Mike Tyson? Because Andre Ward had intimated during an interview, and he was reluctant to come out and say it a little bit because Andre was part of the Netflix broadcasting team. He kind of said, look, I kind of look like it, a little bit. So he was asked by a YouTube reporter, did you carry him? And he literally said, yeah, and then gave a detailed explanation as to why. So whether that was something that Jake Paul decided to do in real time or whether it was something that they had arranged in advance, we don't know that. But he did admit to carrying him. Mike Tyson said he came into the ring with a knee injury and obviously had a sleeve on his leg, a protective sleeve that limited his mobility, which was already limited because, as you've mentioned, and he's 58 years old, right? And then Jake Paul, who's prone to embellishment and WWE type promotion, said that he severely sprained his ankle 3 weeks before the fight. And he gave all kinds of details, although he didn't really provide. He just said it was a severely sprained ankle, but he used words like snapped. Well, if your ankle snapped 3 weeks before the fight, odds are you're not going to have the type of mobility he had in the fight. Because one thing he did seem to have, he didn't throw a lot of punches, and he seemed to carry Mike and let him off the hook and didn't try to knock him out. But he moved around the wing. He moved around the ring fairly well. He didn't seem, he said he was on crutches for 4 to 5 days. Now, maybe he was, but if he was on crutches for 4 to 5 days and was only capable of sparring once or twice from the time he suffered that severe ankle sprain until the fight, it didn't really look like that. But why would you say that if that weren't true? If he didn't have a severely sprained ankle? So now you have two injured fighters, one saying that he carried the other. At what point is it the responsibility of the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation to look into whether this was a legitimate athletic contest? Because it sure doesn't seem like it was.
Yeah, if it ever turned out that this was a scripted event, and to be clear, there's been no evidence presented that it was, Jake Paul would be in a world of trouble in terms of continuing his boxing career, because this was not an exhibition. This was a sanctioned fight. This was something that people were gambling on at pretty staggering numbers. I saw Darren Ravel's tweet after the fight where he just pointed out that I think it was BetMGM that said that it was the most gambled upon boxing match in X number of years. 67% of the action was directed at Mike Tyson. So there would be repercussions. There would be fallout if it turns out that this was orchestrated. I didn't see it. All I saw, Keith, was exactly what I thought I was going to see, where a 58-year-old man came out. And look, Mike Tyson came out guns blazing for the first 30 seconds. Like, he was chasing Jake Paul around the ring. But, like, he's like a video game character that only has so much energy left in his power bar, right? Where it just goes straight back down to the bottom after 30, 35 seconds. After that, he was a 58-year-old man. And yes, I do believe Jake Paul carried him. I noticed that in the middle of the fight. I think it was the fourth round where it looked like if Jake just decided to let go of some right hands, he could have knocked Mike Tyson down or knocked him back far enough that Mark Kalloy, who I think is a pretty good referee, would have been like, you know what, we don't need to see this, right? Could have had his Vitor Belfort, Evander Holyfield moment and said, you know what, we're going to put a stop to this. So that's just kind of how I saw the whole thing play out. I thought it was a simple matter of Mike Tyson just being old, and 58-year-olds don't belong in the ring. Look, I mentioned Holyfield Belfort. Holyfield had one of the great chins in boxing history. At 58 years old, when he fought Vitor Belfort, he was done. Vitor Belfort mowed him down in one round. That's just what happens. It's not a sport for the aged. It's not. So.
And Chris, like, if they wanted to put, if it would be reasonable, well, it's not a good idea, but it would be reasonable if you wanted to make Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield 3.
No.
I'm saying if Mike Tyson was going to fight, if they were insistent on him fighting for nostalgic reasons or whatever reasons, and you wanted to have him fight Evander Holyfield, they're in the same age range, and obviously they have one of the most storied rivalries in the history of American sports. Okay, but why is, like, the thing that's really frustrating about Jake Paul, and look, he's free to fight whomever he wants, and the public clearly had an appetite for this, so shame on them. It's your own fault. You got what you asked for. But the thing with Jake Paul is, like, you can continue doing this because he's making a lot of money. He's been very successful. He's quite literally telling you, I say a lot of things that I don't mean. I'm just selling the event. Don't believe what I say. He literally said that in the post-fight press conference, and he has said things to that point before. So, he's admitting that. The thing that's annoying about him, and I don't have any problem with, he can operate in the boxing space all he wants because he's drawing attention to the sport. He's been a positive influence on women's boxing, as we saw with the Amanda Serrano Katie Taylor rematch on Friday night. Shadeja Green, a woman fighter from here in northern New Jersey, won a world title on the undercard as well. He's had a huge impact on her career. Jake Paul has done some positive things for boxing, and I think deserves credit for that, and also for taking the craft seriously, trying to get. He's not very good, but he's trying to get better, and he's taken it seriously and trained and put everything into training and sparring and everything in Puerto Rico. But it's just difficult to listen to him to continue to say things like. After the fight, he said that he intends to fight for a cruiserweight title within 24 months. Now, he did fight 2 cruiserweights of comparable experience last year, and it was masterful matchmaking because they found 2 cruiserweights with good records that they knew he would blow out, and he did. He's knocked both of them out in the first round. Those were at least positive steps toward becoming some sort of ranked cruiserweight contender, which, as you and I both know, won't take all that much because Gilberto Mendoza and Mauricio, they're going to have their hands out for the Jake Paul business, 7 days a week. But for him to be taken seriously in his pursuit of being a ranked cruiserweight contender, well, you have to start fighting cruiserweights. And in his post-fight press conference, he mentioned fighting Conor McGregor, who is a much smaller MMA fighter who's not a good boxer, as we saw against Floyd Mayweather. He mentioned fighting Canelo Alvarez, which is utterly absurd because Canelo Alvarez would dog walk him like it's nobody's business, and we all know that. Even if it were a cruiserweight, it could be a heavyweight fight. It wouldn't make a difference. Canelo is still an elite level fighter and would take great joy in dog walking Jake Paul. And the third person that he mentioned fighting, he didn't bring it up, but when it was brought up to him, he certainly entertained it, was Gervonta Davis, who competes 90 pounds below where Jake Paul weighed in last Thursday. What are we doing? We're talking about
he was I saw that. He was kind of walked into that one. Somebody asked him about
but he didn't say, hey, he's 90 pounds below me. He's a smurf. Go F off. That's what he should have said. But he said, yeah, I'll fight him. I don't know what the Texas Commission will and won't do at this point, so I shouldn't say they wouldn't sanction it. Maybe they would. But the one group of people that he didn't mention were actual cruiserweight contenders. He mentioned everyone except those people. Now, he probably doesn't know who most of those people are, but I don't know. I mean, does he? Maybe he knows who Jai Apataya is. I don't know, but not that anyone wants to see that fight. But those are the types of people he should be talking about fighting because he's a cruiserweight in his prime, in his physical prime. But he's fighting 58. Chris, a comedian who I'm not all that familiar with, but I forgot his name now. But after the fight, it was the best line of the night. He said, Jake Paul should fight Biden next. And
I saw a lot of that on social.
That's silly, but is it? Is it?
I want to get back in a moment to the Jake Paul opponent list, but I do want to touch on the whole Netflix experience because the numbers that Netflix has released in the aftermath of this fight are truly staggering. 65 million concurrent streams with 38 million concurrent streams in the U.S., 108 million live global viewers. According to something called TV Vision, 56% of all U.S. TV viewing between 12 a.m. and 1 a.m. Eastern time was on this Paul versus Tyson fight. The Taylor Serrano fight averaged an estimated 74 million live viewers globally and became the most watched professional women's sports event in U.S. history with 47 million in the U.S. Now, I have seen some pushback from some smarter TV minds than mine about these numbers. They're not Nielsen-rated numbers, so there is some ambiguity there. But they're numbers, Keith, that we have not seen in decades. That's the good. The bad is that a lot of those viewers had some trouble watching it. There were countless reports of buffering issues, which led competitors to seize on it and take shots like this.
Houston team they beat plays Dallas. But before we get there, speaking of Dallas, did you see Friday night? Our man Gronk was at the big Jake Paul fight against Mike Tyson. There he is right there. Trust us. He was there. Happening during the streaming, I heard, throughout the whole entire fight. What's going on here? It was that kind of thing.
There's also been criticism of the broadcast itself, specifically the use of celebrities like Rosie Perez and Cedric the Entertainer in slots normally reserved for fighters or trainers. Dana White had this to say about the broadcast.
Think about, again, last night, boxing, right? These guys will do a fight, then have a fucking podcast for an hour and 30 minutes before the next fucking fight comes on, right? We're going to do a rain delay? It's never going to happen, man. You know what we do? We go boom, 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 and all the fights fucking roll all night. All the shit talk's done. You don't need to see fucking Rosie Perez breaking down fights and you know.
So, Keith, Netflix has declared this event a success. What say you to that?
Yeah, from their perspective, strictly from a viewership standpoint, it was wildly successful. You couldn't ask for much more than that. We're in the stratosphere of Muhammad Ali, Leon Spinks 2, which really is uncharted territory for boxing at this point. I mean, an estimated 90 million people watched on ABC when Muhammad Ali fought Leon Spinks the second time in September of 1978. I think it was close to 47% of all televisions in use in the United States at the time watched that fight live. I mean, think about that, where boxing's place was on the American sports landscape in American society at that point. We're obviously more than decades away from that. I mean, we're on another planet as it relates to where boxing is in terms of relevancy in the United States anymore. But the fact that this might have exceeded that is incredible. Unfortunately, the fight itself was considered fixed by some people and was certainly not entertaining, although the undercard definitely was. So in that respect, people watched boxing en masse like they haven't maybe in 45, it's almost 50 years. So that's a positive, I suppose. From the Netflix standpoint, we all pay for our Netflix subscriptions, whatever, whether you have the ad supported one or not. What is it, $17 a month, I think is the most you could pay for it. It's not a ton of money, and this wasn't a pay-per-view event. At the same time, it's the largest streaming service in the world. They have all the financial wherewithal that they could conceivably have. Figure it out. Like, I don't want to hear about buffering issues. Like, they have an army of really, really smart people, and they publicly stated before the event that they were more than equipped to handle the traffic that they were going to get on this night, and they were not. So, figure it out. This would be my state. I don't want to hear about whatever problems you had. You're not issuing refunds to people for portions of their monthly subscriptions when this went haywire and people couldn't. The unfortunate thing, Chris, as you well know, is you guys were trying to watch it in Riyadh. We got the same buffering issues in the arena, in the venue itself. You didn't have to be halfway around the world. You couldn't watch it on your laptop in the venue. So they need to clean that up, obviously. But the unfortunate thing is, as you guys saw too, Chris, was that you couldn't see half of the fight you wanted to see, the Taylor-Serrano rematch. You barely saw half of it. So
yeah, I missed 2 of the first 5 rounds because of buffering issues. I did not have any issues for the main event, though I did hear from people after the fact that say they did have issues on it. And that is a problem for Netflix, especially with, they've got Christmas Day NFL games moving forward. If you thought the backlash from boxing fans was bad, wait till you meet the NFL and some backlash they're going to get if it's the same type of screw-ups. I'm with you. I mean, they knew this was going to be a massive audience. And, again, the TV viewership side of it, I am not smart enough to understand all the minutia of that. But, some that have said that the number was too high. Well, I watched it in front of one TV with 8 people, and I know other people that did the same. So you could certainly argue that the viewership might be too low that's being estimated for this fight. And Keith, anecdotally, everyone was watching it. Like, I went to basketball games. Everyone was talking about it. I was getting phone calls for interviews from mainstream outlets that never in a million years were going to talk boxing. You tuned into sports radio shows, generic sports radio shows that talk NFL, NBA, and college football, and they're talking about this thing. It was so easy to access because it's on Netflix and it's at the top of the rail. We'll never know what the actual number was because it's just too complicated to measure that. But it was staggering, and I'm perfectly willing to believe it is as big as Netflix said it was. As for the broadcast itself, look, you and I are kind of traditionalists, right? Like we probably prefer or would have preferred like more Andre Ward or another traditional boxing analyst over the celebrities that they had there. But it was definitely a different audience that they were trying to cater to. And it was an MVP production there. MVP was the one that kind of brought that talent team together and put them on the stage there. So, they're looking at a different audience, trying to bring them in. I certainly prefer, when I'm watching a Mario Barrios fight to hear from, true boxing experts. When I'm watching Taylor versus Serrano, I might want to see, a top women's boxer on there. I saw Michaela Mayer was in the audience. She has done boxing analyst work for Top Rank. She's in and around the same weight class as Taylor and Serrano. She's actually been rumored to fight one or both over the last couple of years. I would have liked to have seen someone like that involved in the broadcast, but whatever. To each their own. That was the decision made by MVP.
Yeah, and Michaela is an excellent broadcaster. I worked the Olympics with her up in Stamford, Connecticut for 3 weeks. I think she's an up-and-coming, underrated broadcaster, and I think she'll have a real career in it once her boxing career is over. Something like that would have been worthwhile for them to explore for sure. I'm with you, Chris, in that, Andre Ward is excellent. He's an excellent analyst. I think Roy Jones has long been one of the best at, sometimes you don't understand what he's talking about a little on occasion, but Roy Jones, from a boxing standpoint, from an analytical standpoint, might be the best there ever was at seeing things 4 and 5 steps in advance, and then those things unfold in the ring. He's brilliant in that way. And Roy is obviously a legendary fighter, so they had him on the broadcast, which was great. Rosie Perez is a huge boxing fan. She comes and supports boxing, particularly in New York oftentimes. I understand why the traditional boxing fans would not want Rosie Perez to be broadcasting an event of this enormity. But you got to remember, like you said, Chris, that they're targeting a different audience. And I think Rosie has something upcoming on Netflix. There's a lot of cross promotion there and everything, going Ralph.
Hey, how many Ralph Macchio, William Zabka shots do we get?
William Zabka 47 times.
Which is, by the way, not unusual. Like Showtime puts on an event, they're putting Ray Donovan guys out there. So
they should do that. It's an opportunity to promote their shows. I mean, of course, but especially when you have an audience that big. But so I would prefer the traditional broadcast team too, but this was not a traditional event, and so they went in a different direction. And something else that I was told in advance of the event, and Mauro Ranallo is a friend of mine, and I think he does a good job. And I understand people have their issues with sometimes he's a little prone to hyperbole a little bit. That's his that's the way he goes about his blow by blow gig and everything, but I think Mauro does a solid job and everything. But I was told that Sean Grande was going to be the blow by blow guy for this event.
He was.
Yeah, and I know Sean well. I got to know him even better doing the Olympics with him and Michaela, as I mentioned earlier. I was not on the broadcast team. I was a researcher and reporter and stuff behind the scenes. But I gained a real appreciation for the way he goes about his business and does his research. And he's not really all that known to boxing fans because he's busy with his play-by-play gig with the Boston Celtics. He's their radio guy. But I hope at some point he becomes a more prominent voice in blow-by-blow boxing because I think he's excellent. He's underrated. But they handle the broadcast team the way they handle it. Mauro is a very seasoned, experienced guy who's known to boxing fans. And, if you came away from this, I don't mean you specifically, but if anyone came away from this complaining most about the broadcast team, you were watching the wrong things. The thing that you should be complaining about the most was the farcical fight that was the main event. And the fact that they were sort of telling you that this may or may not have been prearranged.
Yeah. Understood there. The last thing about Netflix is that I would not expect them to become this boxing content provider, right? Like that's not their game. They're not going to get through this event and say, you know what, let's give Top Rank, $50 million to do weekly shows. Like they're in the events business. They're looking to do Christmas Day games, Jake Paul type of events. Maybe if something else comes up down the line, they would do that. But I don't see Netflix becoming a player in this particular space. Last thing on all this, Keith, and we touched on this briefly, the Jake Paul future. Like in the aftermath of this event, you know, you've had all these fighters that are out there that have denigrated him and his performance, that they're all now calling him out, like from the retired fighters like Andre Ward and Carl Froch and the never-ending pursuit my pal Sergio Mora has of fighting Jake Paul, to like active guys like Daniel Dubois is in Jake Paul's DMs. Daniel Dubois, who fought on a Jake Paul undercard years ago, is in Jake Paul's DMs offering him a world title shot. Artur Beterbiev, who is the undisputed light heavyweight champion, is on social media offering Jake Paul a shot at all the titles. So say what you want about Jake Paul, but he's got everybody's attention, and everybody wants a piece of that Jake Paul pie. Now, Keith, there is, my opinion on this is there's no upside to Jake Paul ever fighting anyone of any type of consequence. Yes, he does publicly say, I want to fight for a world title. I want to fight Canelo Alvarez. But every time he says that, I kind of just shrug, because there's no upside to going down the path that leads you there, right? Like, the best options for Jake Paul, number one, I would think, is this long discussed YouTube matchup with KSI, which, if you're not familiar with that space, that is a fight, whatever you want to call it, that would sell out like O2 Arena, you know, probably do a big number at Wembley Stadium. Like, that's a huge event over in the UK. Make them tens of millions of dollars going up against each other. KSI is Logan Paul's partner with his Prime Energy drink. They've been having a back and forth for years. KSI has been in that misfit boxing space for a long time. That's the biggest revenue generator. You got Tommy Fury coming back in January, another one of those misfits cards. They could do a rematch that would probably generate a decent amount of money. You mentioned Conor McGregor earlier. Way too small for him, but maybe Conor says, you know what, I want to get a piece of that money too. Like, there is no upside whatsoever for Jake Paul to say, you know what, I feel like to get closer to the cruiserweight title that I'm chasing, I am going to challenge Chris Billum-Smith. Like, I'm going to take him on and see if I can test myself. That fight not only doesn't generate anywhere near the revenue the other ones I'm talking about, but it's also a fight he can't win. He cannot beat Chris Billum-Smith. So, like, I would say first, I am wowed by how thirsty some of these fighters are out there, how overtly thirsty these guys are about getting a shot at Jake Paul. But I would say to them and say to everybody, it ain't going to happen. Maybe you might see him in against some of these guys he was dispatching in the first round, you know, over the next year or so. But I think far more likely you're going to see him chase these big money, high reward, low risk types of fights that have made him famous.
Yeah. And look, there's a thirst element to it that makes you a little uncomfortable with some of this. But some of them are reacting to things that he has said that has offended them, like Carl Froch. I don't know how exactly they got into it, but, you know, Carl Froch is almost 50 years old, but I bet he could walk off his couch at 50 years old and not be in all that great a shape, and also dog walk Jake Paul. So
probably, but like he's
I know,
been
no one
chasing
cares.
Jake
No,
for years. Yeah,
no one cares. And I don't want to see Andre Ward fight Jake Paul, and I don't want to see Oprah fight Jake Paul. I don't want to see any of it. I don't care. Like, just stop with the BS. No one cares about any of this. If you want to fight someone that's comparable to your, not the problem is that the public is supporting this, whether it's his fan base or in this case, much outside of his fan base. People are supporting this, so it's going to continue whether we like it or not. But you made a good point about Tommy Fury. Tommy Fury is his rival. They had a very competitive fight. That is the only loss on Jake Paul's record. Why haven't they fought again? They're both below average boxers, I would say, right? They're on comparable levels. They're around the same age. They have a rivalry. That makes sense. They should fight each other. Having all these other silly potential fights or whatever you would call it, or people calling him, it's just a waste of everyone's time and energy. It's especially if you're covering the sport in any constructive way. I mean, yeah, we all need clicks and people to click on videos and stories and all that kind of stuff. But at a certain point, it's just goofy and useless. So
Can I add one more guy to that conversation that came out this week? Oliver McCall.
who fought last night? I believe he fought last night.
59. Yes,
I know.
Oliver McCall,
and had a
calling
nervous breakdown against Lennox Lewis how many years ago? It's just like
this.
that's
By
what
the way, the state of Tennessee sanctioning Oliver McCall to fight. What is wrong with people? What are we doing? Do we not give a shit about if these guys wind up with scrambled eggs in their brains?
But that's what I mean. It's just like at a certain point, there's nothing just to circle back to the Biden thing. Yeah, of course it's ridiculous, but there appears to be nothing that's too ridiculous. Would I see someone legitimately proposing him to fight George Foreman? No, I wouldn't. At this, there's nothing that's too far at this point. So if he's clearly not interested in being taken seriously, or he wouldn't be doing these types of things, right? I mean, that's why it's frustrating, because yes, he's been a wildly successful salesman, and kudos to him. If you can get people under the tent and buy what you're selling, well, you're doing something right, and he deserves credit for that, and also for shining a light on women's boxing in a positive way, and some of the other constructive things that he's tried to do for boxing. So, he deserves credit for those things. But in terms of his career path and where he's going, fight Tommy Fury or KSI, as you said, fight those types of people, and just, stay in your lane, so to speak, and lean into what you are, as opposed to all of these things that are not going to happen, and just really tarnish the sport. Now, he's not worried about tarnishing the sport. He's worried about making as much money out of this as humanly possible, and then going off and doing whatever he's going to do with the rest of his life. He'll continue to entertain people in various capacities. And why should he be worried about the health of boxing? I mean, he's only been involved in it for 5 years. I mean, it's not like he's a kid, so he's been invested in this since he was a kid or anything. What does he care about the health of the sport and whatever? So he's going to keep doing what he's doing. But having everyone else feed into it is just aggravating and obnoxious, and it will continue whether we like it or not, though.
Oliver McCall says he wants to get revenge for Nate Robinson and Mike Tyson. And that is all I have to say about that.